Welcome to another edition of HorseCenter, everyone. I am Brian Zipsey, and as always, I have the fantastic pleasure of being joined by my co-host to the East Coast. That's Matt Schiffman. How are you today, Matt?
I'm great, Brian. I'm back in New Jersey for a while after spending the first 11 days at Saratoga.
Oh, you rubbing it in, Matt. Luckily, I will be at Saratoga in a couple days from now, so I can catch up a little bit on the spa treatment at Saratoga. Matt, speaking of Saratoga, of course, we saw another fantastic performance by the 4-year-old chestnut son of Candy Ride. I speak of Gunrunner, of course. Gunrunner's Whitney was big, Matt, so big that I wanted to do this week's HorseCenter show on Gunrunner, and nothing but Gunrunner. How does that sound?
That sounds great. The big horse deserves a show to himself because he just seems to be getting better and better, Brian.
That's right, Matt. Every once in a while, we do these specials on individual horses, and Gunrunner is certainly deserving. Matt, did you know that I was there in the paddock snapping pictures? Somebody told me that Gunrunner was a good one. I'm talking about his first race of his life. It was a maiden special weight at Churchill Downs. Put a little bit to win on the Asmussen-trained Winchell runner, making his first start at Churchill Downs. He hasn't really slowed down since. Matt, he was a winner at Churchill. He was a winner at Keeneland before finally making his stakes debut late in his 2-year-old season, 2015. It was only his third lifetime start. He came in undefeated as one of the horses to beat in the Jockey Club, the Kentucky Jockey Club at Churchill Downs. But that track came up a little wet.
It sure did, Brian. And as we'll talk about as we continue to go through the career of Gunrunner, that was only one of 2 times in his 16-race career that he has finished out of the money. And both of those times, Brian, of course, we know now, were on sloppy tracks that were sealed.
That's right, Matt. So he won his first 2 starts. They were both sprints, as I mentioned, Churchill Downs, Keeneland. They won nicely, although not overly impressive, but he was clearly the best horse in each of those 2 races. And I didn't think his 4th place finish in the big field in the Kentucky Jockey Club was necessarily a bad race. As you mentioned, wet track, and those are the only 2 times in his career he's finished out of the money. But his 4th in the Kentucky Jockey Club, first time around 2 turns, first time against really good horses, big field. He was up there, and then he just faded a little bit to finish 4th. Nothing wrong with that result. Going into 2016 last year, he looked like a horse with quite a bit of potential, maybe not on most people's top 5s, but certainly a horse people knew about and wanted to see more from. His stakes debut was decent, but as we moved forward, he had about 3 months off between that Kentucky Jockey Club and making his sophomore debut down in New Orleans. Things really got going. I think there was a jockey switch. Things really got going down there for Gunrunner.
Yep, and as Steve Asmussen is inclined to do, he winters at the fairgrounds in New Orleans, and he likes to take the Louisiana Trail to the Derby. They made a rider switch that you mentioned to Florent Geroux at that point, and it was the beginning of the growth and progression of the Gunrunner that we now know, because he was victorious in the Risen Star, first stakes win, grade 2 win, and then went on to the Louisiana Derby, where he was also victorious, another grade 2, and heading into the Kentucky Derby with plenty of points, and a horse that now a lot of people were interested in.
So just like his 2-year-old season, Matt, he wins his first 2 races of the year, as you mentioned, both down at the fairgrounds. The Risen Star, I think, if we are looking back here, it was his 3rd win in 4 starts, still only made 4th. That was only his 4th start. He became a graded stakes winner, as you mentioned, a grade 2 winner there. But there was a lot of talk that Mo Tom might have been the best horse in the Risen Star. He had some trouble. Gunrunner, again, not overly impressive. But I think when we got to the Louisiana Derby, his 2nd start of his 3-year-old season, his 4th win in his first 5 starts, it was becoming clear that Gunrunner was one of the better 3-year-olds in the country. That Louisiana Derby was pretty decisive, and I think the first time that people said this is a grade 1 type of horse in Gunrunner.
And in the Louisiana Derby, again, with Florent Geroux up, Gunrunner really started to prove that he was a 3-year-old to take note of. He made it clear that he was the best horse in Louisiana on the road to the Derby. It was not Motom. Florent Geroux guided him skillfully, and he pulled off to win by around 4 lengths in the Louisiana Derby.
Yeah, Matt, it was by more than 4 lengths down there at Fairgrounds. The Louisiana Derby was, I guess, a bit of a coming out party. This was his 4th win now in 5 lifetime starts. It also started to show how tactical Gunrunner was, finding good position and really taking over the race. Motom again had a little trouble, but this time Gunrunner was just clearing away the best horse in Louisiana. So he went to the Derby as not one of the lowest favorites, but certainly one on a short list of the horses to beat in the Kentucky Derby. Now, I think it's safe to say back then, Matt, as good as he is now, and we know what happened to the other horses, but it's safe to say at that point, he wasn't the best 3-year-old in the country, but he ran a very, very good race at Churchill Downs on the first Saturday in May.
He certainly did. And keeping in mind, folks, right, that this is back in 2016, and the big name heading into the race was Nyquist. Just to remember the quality and who was running then and who's left running now a year later. But yes, it was Nyquist, and as we all know, it was Nyquist that won the Kentucky Derby, and that would be the last win of Nyquist's career. And Gunrunner had a tough trip, like many horses do in that 20-horse field. But he made what a lot of people considered is a very, very strong move down the stretch, and left fans of Gunrunner very optimistic with his 3rd place finish in the Derby.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. The Kentucky Derby was a very good race. I think we're seeing a progression here of Gunrunner from a good 2-year-old, a promising 2-year-old, to a better 3-year-old. Those 2 wins in Louisiana, and then the Kentucky Derby. Again, good tactical position, made a winning type of move. It should be noted that, of course, this was his first race at 1.25 miles, a distance that he has yet to win at. But a very good 1.25 mile race. Nyquist was the more experienced horse. He was the 2-year-old champion, the undefeated 2-year-old champion. As you mentioned, it was his last win, so it was kind of a swan song in a way for Nyquist, at least as a undefeated winning champion. He never won another race after this. Nyquist was better than him that day. Exaggerators certainly went by him in the stretch, but Gunrunner ran a very good Kentucky Derby. And if he could keep improving, this was his 6th lifetime race, first at 1.25 miles. If he could keep improving, we'd see a very, very good horse. And that's exactly what's happened. Now, the rest of his 3-year-old year is a little spotty. Let me just read you these figures, Matt, from his 3-year-old year. 9 races, 4 wins, 2 seconds, 2 thirds. 8 times out of 9, he was in the money. 4 out of 9, all graded stakes, he won. He won 1.97 million or so just a shade under 2 million. But the fact is, he didn't win the biggest races. We talked about the Kentucky Derby. He came back to win a Matt win for fun over decent horses, but no world beaters. And then he ran into Travers, and of course he was kind of crushed by Arrogate. But he was 3rd in that huge field, 14-horse field. He was very wide. He came out of the 14 hole. He got carried wide on the first turn. I think the Travers was a good performance when it's all said and done.
Yeah, Brian, and just to emphasize a couple things that you said, you said that his 3-year-old campaign was 9 races, and that doesn't happen very much anymore. And I think that we've learned that maybe Gunrunner is a little bit of one of the throwback horse. He's a little bit of a hickory kind of horse that thrives on competition and can put together a campaign of 9 races. And no, he didn't hit the winner's circle in that sequence that included the Haskell, where he again had another sloppy sealed track and finished 5th there. That was the worst finish of his career. But the Travers, and then the Pennsylvania Derby, where again he finished 2nd behind a horse named Connect that you and I were both very high on, an extremely talented horse that has had to retire since then. And then on to the Breeders' Cup, where, again, he finished second. Nothing to be ashamed of, but it still seemed like Asmussen had some things that he was trying to figure out about Gunrunner.
Okay, so he fades in the Haskell before the Travers. We had talked about the Travers first, but the Haskell, yeah. And the Haskell was another one of those wet tracks where he faded a little bit, faded out of it, finished fifth. I'm not convinced that Gunrunner couldn't be a Grade 1 winner on a wet track. It just so happens that maybe that's not his favorite surface. Neither the Kentucky Jockey Club or the Haskell were terrible races, but right now he's not proven on a wet track. The Penn Derby, though, the race after the Travers, I want to look at that one a little bit, Matt, because I thought the Penn Derby was also a really big performance by Gunrunner. All the big 3-year-olds not named Arrogate were basically in there. I mean, you had Nyquist, you had Exaggerator, Awesome Slew, we know is a good horse, Cupid, Connect, very, very good lightly raced horse who unfortunately only got to race once as a 4-year-old. He won the Cigar Mile at the end of the year. Connect was a serious racehorse. But if you look at that Penn Derby, Matt, Connect just, the rail just opened wide open for Connect, and Gunrunner had to be wide. He had to be wide again. He was a little wide on the first turn, but he was certainly wide on the far turn, and he lost quite a bit of ground to Connect. Connect shot through. Gunrunner was still coming out in the middle of the track after Connect was behind him earlier in the race. And it wasn't easy for Connect. Connect dug down nicely. They pulled away from every other good horse in that race. Penn Derby, second to Connect, but a very good performance. Easily said that he was the best horse in the Penn Derby. Now, I didn't think he ran his absolute best race when he got out to California in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. But looking back, there's some things you see in that race. Again, he's a little wide. He got carried wide into the first turn. Giroux is holding him back a little bit, but they're running 22 and 45. I guess I'm talking about Run Happy, Dortmund, and Gunrunner was right there chasing that fast pace. And you can see Giroux trying to get Gunrunner off that fast pace a little bit. It was probably too fast a pace for a 2-turn race. But who lasted of the horses there? Gunrunner, Run Happy first to go, of course. Dortmund, the good older horse Dortmund. Gunrunner was better than Dortmund in there. Tamaracuse had the momentum. Gunrunner tried, but he couldn't hold off Tamaracuse, who ran a best race of his life in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. But again, I think a very good race. And the fact that Giroux was holding back Gunrunner a little bit, I can understand it because how fast the fractions were. But that did lead to a little bit of change in tactics in Gunrunner.
They certainly did. And it was at that point, one more start coming up for Gunrunner in 2016, back to the home base at Churchill Downs, where he'd been successful before for the Clark Handicap for a Grade 1. And it was at that point that Asmussen decided, we're just going to let Gunrunner be Gunrunner. Let him be a horse that's a free striding horse that's got nice speed. Let him get out on the lead where he can get into stride and relax, and let's see what happens. Well, what happened was it was Gunrunner's first Grade 1 win in the Clark, and he took it wire to wire.
Yes, Matt, the Grade 1 Clark. So we're talking, I guess he had won 3 graded stakes races before in his 3-year-old season. This becomes his first Grade 1 win. It was his second try after the BC Dirt Mile against older horses, and there were a lot of good older horses in there, Matt. Breaking Lucky is still going pretty strong. Shaman Ghost was in there. Shaman Ghost, of course, has had a very good year this year. Opportunity, FNX. It was a strong field of older horses. Gunrunner was a 3-year-old, and Gunrunner, took it to him. Noble Bird tried to make up some ground on the backstretch, but Gunrunner really looked like a winner the whole way, and he was very strong in the stretch. A pretty dominant win to end his 3-year-old season. And yeah, letting him run a little bit more. Now, that's not to say he's wiring everything as a 4-year-old. He was better at 3 than he was at 2. Clearly, Matt, he's better at 4 than he was at 3. Freewheeling, they're letting him roll a little bit. But on the other hand, he doesn't need the lead either.
Yep, we've seen that before. We've seen that he can stalk and pounce when the situation is right. And obviously, in some of his earlier races, we've seen him come from pretty far back.
Absolutely. Gunrunner, starts the year, again, he had about 3 months off between his 3-year-old season, that big win in the Clark, until his debut at 4. There was some issues getting him to the Pegasus World Cup. It would have been nice to see him in there. Didn't work out, so they debuted Gunrunner as a 4-year-old in Arkansas. It was Oaklawn Park. One more racetrack for Gunrunner to show his stuff. That list of racetracks where he's running big is growing all the time, Matt. Razorback was just a dominant performance against decent handicap horses. Then he goes to the Dubai World Cup. Again, only his second try at 10 his third try at 10 furlongs. He's now 0 for 3 at 10 furlongs, which we have to talk about a little bit, Matt. But I'm not sure how much better a race he could have run in the Dubai World Cup. Again, a big field, and Neolithic was third. Keen Ice was behind him. Other good horses behind him, but he was clearly the second best horse in the race, behind a monster performance by Arrogate.
Yeah, it looked like a lot of the race that he was the best horse. Of course, if we remember, Arrogate got off to a really, really bad start out of the gate and had a tremendous amount of ground to make up. And Gunrunner was running along, and for an awful long amount of the race, it looked like he was going to be the winner. But it was one of those spectacular performances by Arrogate, because he got going and was able to run down Gunrunner and draw away to his big Dubai World Cup victory. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about what you brought up, Brian. It certainly puts the question marks about the 10 furlongs, because if he was going to hold on and go the distance and beat Arrogate, it sure looked like that was the time. Again, we were talking about Arrogate at the top of his game, and a loss in that situation to Arrogate is different than a loss to other horses. And again, like you said about the sloppy track, it doesn't necessarily mean that Arrogate can't get the 10 furlongs. We just haven't seen it yet.
That's right. Gunrunner is 0 for 3 after the Dubai World Cup. Big performance, Matt. And I think there's a lot of factors in horse racing, as we know. We're not saying that Gunrunner can't beat Arrogate, because I think that would be a silly thing to say. Look how good he's been since the Dubai World Cup. There's no doubt in my mind that he wins the Stephen Foster at 10 furlongs, 12 furlongs, what have you. And I'll say the same thing about the Whitney. It didn't matter that it was 9 furlongs versus 10 furlongs. Gunrunner's going to win those races. And it's not to say that he can't beat Arrogate. You know, the track at Dubai is different than the track at Del Mar or other places. Maybe on a more speed favoring day, or maybe with less pressure throughout the race, less horses around him early, Gunrunner has a chance. But right now, 0 for 3, 10 furlongs, 0 for 2 against Arrogate. But what we've seen since Dubai World Cup has changed our thinking a little bit as far as Arrogate, the dominating horse of the world on dirt, and then Gunrunner maybe the second best horse on dirt. I think now we have 2 top horses in the country or in the world on dirt, and they're Arrogate and Gunrunner. I think Gunrunner has distanced himself from the rest of the pack, whether you're talking about more Spirit or Shaman Ghost or Keen Ice, whoever you want to talk about as the third best dirt horse right now, at least on the male side. But Gunrunner, you know who he reminds me, Matt, a little bit of? He reminds me a little bit of Candy Ride. Candy Ride, of course, is his sire, and I think Gunrunner is the best. Candy Ride's been a very good sire, but Gunrunner is the best horse that Candy Ride has sired. And Candy Ride we never got to see as a younger horse. Of course, when he raced in America, he was already 4. Just a brilliant performer. He had lots of speed. He could carry that speed and just dominate horses. We only got to see 3 American races, unfortunately, and his final race was his best in the Pacific Classic at 10 furlongs. I think Gunrunner's become kind of a Candy Ride, and he's 4. When we saw Candy Ride, he was 4. So it makes some sense. Gunrunner's progression this year has been fantastic. Stephen Foster, Matt, you always worry about how they're going to come over after the Dubai World Cup, after the little bit of break. But the Stephen Foster, I remember I was in a hotel watching it there with my family, and the Stephen Foster was another kind of eye-opening performance for Gunrunner.
Yeah, Brian, he just continues to get better, and in the Stephen Foster again, it was go to the lead and just keep going and going and going, and just an eye-opening performance, like you said, on the heels of the Dubai World Cup. Asmussen seems to have just everything going the right way with Gunrunner, and with the subsequent loss that Arrogate faced out in Del Mar, all the conversations changed. Before that, it was Arrogate's this, Arrogate's this. Nobody can beat Arrogate, but I don't believe that any longer.
That's right. How could you, seeing what we've seen since Dubai? Since Dubai, of course, Arrogate has won one race, and it was bad. It was poor. Gunrunner's run 2 races, and they're pretty remarkable performances. Of course, the Foster was at Churchill Downs, which is his home track. I kind of crowed about the fact that now Gunrunner is winning all these races at different tracks, but Churchill Downs is still his home track. That's where he won his first Grade 1, the Clark. The Foster was huge. He went to the lead, as you said, under Giroux. But then he comes to Saratoga in his next race, the Grade 1 Whitney, which of course was just Saturday. And again, I saw something that we've never seen from Gunrunner. And I'm not talking about a horseshoe in his tail, Matt. But this time, because he's so good, because he's the heavy favorite, because he's one of the 2 best dirt horses in the world, there was a rabbit entered. The rabbit was for War Story, but he might as well have been for Keen Ice or any other horse in the race, frankly. And the rabbit bothered Gunrunner not one little bit, Matt. He can win, he can wire them. And I think that's the most dangerous thing a horse can do is to go to the front and say, try to catch me. But if there's a problem up front, if there's a contention up front, Gunrunner can wait and then make his move. And I thought the Whitney was beautiful in that way.
Yeah, and I think Asmussen and Giroux, they knew. They know their horse very well, and I don't think they were particularly concerned about the quality of this particular rabbit in the race, Cautious Giant. Yes, they can go out and set fast fractions, and that could disrupt the race, but I think they were very confident that knowing everything that Gunrunner can do, that they could just sit a little bit behind the horse and reel in Cautious Giant whenever they wanted to. And you could see that with Giroux. You could see that Gunrunner wanted to go, and Giroux didn't want to be throttling him and holding him back. And they made their decision to take Cautious Giant when they wanted to. And when they did, they went right by, and it was all over. And of course, that's when the wackiness of the horseshoe happened, as they were getting ready to go past Cautious Giant. Somehow one of the shoes on Cautious Giant came off and flew up in the air. And folks, you got to look at the replays really carefully. The shoe flies up in the air. It comes down, bounces off the back end of Cautious Giant, bounces over towards Gunrunner, and gets lodged in his tail. It's even, if you haven't seen it, folks, it's even in the Equibase chart after the race that Cautious Giant's shoe got dislodged and got entangled in his tail. Just a wacky thing, and it did nothing to stop Gunrunner from going on to the lead and drawing away. It looked like Keen Ice might make a bid, but no way, Brian. He just drew away from Keen Ice as easy as could be.
Yeah, Keen Ice, Matt, was rallying nicely ahead of the other horses to get clearly second best in here. But he was losing ground to Gunrunner. That's how good Gunrunner ran in the Whitney. Horseshoe, wacky, crazy stuff. If they did it 1,000 times, if he threw a shoe in the race, it's not going to do what it did in the Grade 1 Whitney with Gunrunner. Just one of those things, crazy. But again, this Whitney was another eye-opener. You mentioned, his connections said, okay, we'll just let the rabbit go and then we'll take over. But you have to have the horse to do that, because we're now talking about a horse that can run horses off their feet on the lead. I think if there's not a lot of speed in any race, Gunrunner can just dominate it. And depending on the track, Arrogate or no, Gunrunner is a threat to just wire any field he enters. But to be the type of horse that can sit and wait and then make his move, that shows me Gunrunner's even better. I also like the fact that it was at Saratoga, Matt. He's won a lot of stakes races at a lot of different tracks. I've mentioned Churchill Downs is his most constant as his home base. And that's where the Breeders' Cup Classic of next year, 2018, we hope Gunrunner will be around for a 5-year-old season and maybe really be the horse next year when the Breeders' Cup Classic is at Churchill Downs. But we don't know that he's going to stick around for his 5-year-old season. I'm just talking about Churchill Downs. But to do it at Saratoga, that means something more to me as well, because Saratoga is a tricky track. It's a track that doesn't always play kindly to horses like Gunrunner. It's a track where he was 0 for 1 coming in after breaking from the 14 hole and running a distant third in the Travers last year. So for him to do this on the stage of Saratoga, the tricky track at Saratoga, again, another big feather in the cap of Gunrunner, Matt. And I guess we're going to see Gunrunner at Saratoga. We're going to see more of that, because the Grade 1 Whitney, the Grade 1 Woodward will be his next start. It's the beginning of September. It's about 9 weeks before the Breeders' Cup Classic. I'm guessing that the Woodward will be the last prep for the Breeders' Cup Classic. I don't think he's going in the dirt mile this year. So we'll see him at Saratoga again. This time Shaman Ghost could be in the discussion as maybe even tougher competition than we saw in the Whitney. But Saratoga means something to me, Matt.
It certainly does. And it's not just the status of winning at a place like Saratoga. Like you said, Brian, it's a very, very deep track. It's a tiring track. It's a track that many horses don't necessarily run their best races on. And it certainly did not affect Gunrunner at all. Of course, he has been training there. Asmussen does a summer at Saratoga, so he's familiar with the surface. But it's a feather in his cap that he, at this point, can go to any racetrack of any kind in the country, in the world, I guess, Brian, and not really have any concern about will he perform his best race. He seems to be able to run a big one on any surface, and that is a calling card of the best horses that run.
16 lifetime races so far, Matt. We are in no way concluding the career of Gunrunner by this kind of tribute show we're doing today, folks. 16 lifetime races, 9 wins, 3 seconds, 2/3, super consistent, tactical, great speed. He's won over just about $5.3 million now, and he's far from done. Maybe we'll see him in 2018 Breeders' Cup Classic is at Churchill Downs in 2018. But for now, we look forward to the Woodward on Saturday, September 2. And then, of course, in early November at Del Mar, a track he's never been to, Matt. But as you so eloquently stated, he can run anywhere. He doesn't need to bring his track with him. The Breeders' Cup Classic, that likely will mean Arrogate. Arrogate, of course, needs to bounce back in the Pacific Classic. I can't expect to see a performance like we saw out of Arrogate in the San Diego, again in the Pacific Classic. I think both of us think Arrogate will bounce back in the Pacific Classic in a little over a week. Now, Matt, are we saying with this show that Gunrunner is better than Arrogate, or maybe better than Arrogate?
Well, you know what, Brian? I don't know if I'm saying that, but at this point, I feel like they're kind of on par. The invincibility of Arrogate isn't quite what it was before, and that just makes the second half of this racing year exciting for all of us fans.
Absolutely, Matt. Well stated. I do think if both horses are running their absolute best, especially at 10 furlongs, Arrogate is still the horse to beat. But Gunrunner is having a remarkable career. good at 2, better at 3, really, really better at 4. We love what we're seeing from this horse who's so consistent, runs every time. The Woodward coming up, the Breeders' Cup Classic. Hopefully, Arrogate gets back on the boil and does his thing in the Pacific Classic, and then we have a Breeders' Cup Classic to really look forward to. Maybe he'd have a better chance against him at 9 furlongs, but I don't care. I want to see this gun runner against Arrogate again. The Travers is one thing. The Dubai World Cup, Arrogate was the better horse. Gunrunner is still getting better, and at least this year since Dubai, he's the more consistent horse. So kudos to Gunrunner. We love the Whitney. Can I get a parting shot from you, sir?
I want to say thank you to Gunrunner and his connections for letting him run. And like you said, Brian, knowing the Winchells and that they like to run their horses, I expect to see him again in 2018.
That'd be nice. Matt, we also should thank our sponsor, the best contest site out there, Derby Wars. Folks, thank you for watching every week. Thank you for saying hello to us as you always do at the racetrack. Don't be afraid to subscribe to the YouTube channel here at Horse Racing Nation so you can see HorseCenter every week. And thank you to our producer, Matt. You usually do the thank you to our producer. You want to do it again?
Sure. I want to thank the Iron Man, Brett Workman, for producing our show.
And completing his very first triathlon this weekend. Folks, we'll see you next week on a new edition of HorseCenter.